everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us.
It's great to be here.
Today we're going to be tackling a topic that is, I think, pretty important and also pretty complex.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about autism and trauma and the connection or the perceived connection between the two.
Yeah, this is something we're seeing a lot more of.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a bunch of blog posts and articles that we've been looking at, but we're really focusing in on this one blog in particular that kind of takes a really deep dive into this idea and asks the question is saying, autism equals trauma. Is that accurate?
Right.
Or is it helpful, or could it even be harmful?
And they're really pushing back against that idea that those two things are the same.
Exactly. Yeah, and so they start off right off the bat by giving a really clear definition of what autism is, and they highlight the fact that it is neurodevelopmental.
Right.
So it's about how the brain is wired, and particularly when it comes to things like social interaction, communication, and behavior. But here's their main point. Autism is a natural variation in the brain. It's not a product of some trauma that you went through.
And that's a really important distinction to make.
Exactly.
Because if we just assume that autism is always the result of some past trauma, then we're kind of missing the point, you know?
Yeah.
It's like saying that everyone with blue eyes must have had some genetic mutation from looking at the sky for too long,
Right.
Just doesn't make sense.
It's about different wiring, not damage.
Exactly.
And the blog goes on to say that not only is that inaccurate, but it can actually do a lot of harm, this idea of equating autism with trauma.
I see.
And one of the first things they point out is that it kind of dismisses the actual experience of autistic people.
Right?
Like it suggests that their way of being is somehow a broken reaction to something bad that happened, instead of just being a part of who they are.
Right. It's like their way of being in the world is wrong somehow.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
needs to be fixed.
And it brings up this big question of, is we're looking at autistic behaviors through this lens of trauma, are we even going to understand them correctly?
All right. Are we going to misinterpret what we're seeing?
Yeah, and the blog argues that that misinterpretation could have some really negative consequences.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, they give an example of, somebody having trouble making eye contact.
Right.
And you assume it's because of some past abuse. But what if it's actually a sensory overload thing, which is really common in autism?
Totally.
And so you're totally missing the mark. You're misunderstanding the person, and you're probably making them feel really misunderstood in that moment.
And if we're always looking for some, hidden trauma, we might end up, pushing treatments that focus on, digging into the past instead of actually addressing, what the autistic person needs right now.
Exactly.
Like maybe they need help with sensory processing or, communication skills.
Exactly.
Not necessarily, rehashing some, imagined trauma.
Right. And then the blog goes on to talk about this other really harmful aspect of this, and that is that equating autism with trauma can actually make the stigma around autism even worse.
Which makes sense when you think about it.
Totally.
If someone believes that your autism is a sign of some like deep, dark secret, they might start seeing you as fragile or unstable or even potentially dangerous.
Right.
And just that, that subtle shift in how they see you can have huge consequences.
They had this one example in the blog that really stuck with me. They were talking about, imagine an autistic child having a meltdown in public.
Mm-hmm.
Which can be a totally normal way for them to cope with overwhelming emotions or, sensory input.
Right.
But if the people around them are assuming that that meltdown is because of some past trauma, they might react with fear or judgment. They might even call the authorities instead of offering understanding and support.
Right. It completely changes how people respond to the situation.
Exactly. And it really just shows how powerful the language we use can be.
Absolutely.
And how that language shapes how we see autism, how we treat people with autism, and even how autistic people see themselves.
And that's where I think, the blog really hits on this need for accuracy.
Yeah.
When we talk about autism. It's not just about getting the words right. It's about creating a world where autistic people are understood and respected and supported.
And that means understanding what they actually need to thrive, not what we assume they need based on some inaccurate label.
Exactly.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're just getting started.
And, it all comes back to this idea of like creating inclusive and supportive environments.
Right.
Which the blog talks a lot about. It's not about fixing autistic people.
Yeah.
It's about building a world where they can just be themselves
Mm-hmm.
and thrive.
So what does that look like?
Well, think about it this way. Like, Imagine you're stuck in a room where the lights are like blindingly bright
Okay.
and everything's too loud and people are talking in some language that you barely understand.
Yeah.
You'd probably be freaking out, right? You'd feel super anxious, maybe even shut down completely.
For sure.
But now imagine that same room, but you can dim the lights. There's like a quiet corner you can escape to.
Right.
And people are willing to communicate with you in a way that you understand.
Right.
That's kind of the difference that a truly inclusive environment can make.
That's a really good analogy. I like that.
It's not that autistic people can't handle the world. It's that the world often isn't set up to handle them.
Right.
And a lot of the challenges they face aren't because of their autism.
Mm-hmm.
It's because things just aren't designed with their needs in mind.
And this is where this whole idea of neurodiversity comes in. It's about recognizing that there's no one right way for a brain to work.
Exactly.
Autism is just one variation on a spectrum, and it comes with its own strengths and challenges, just like any other way of being.
And that's why I think it's so dangerous to kind of lump everyone under this autism equals trauma idea.
Right.
Because it leads to this one-size-fits-all approach to treatment, which isn't helpful for anyone.
Totally, because like we were saying before, every autistic person is different.
Exactly.
And their needs are going to be totally different.
Some people might need speech therapy. Some might need occupational therapy to help with sensory overload. Some might need help with social skills or just navigating everyday life.
Yeah.
It's not about finding a cure for autism.
Right.
It's about finding what works for each individual.
And that's why I think the point that the blog makes about amplifying autistic voices is so important.
Absolutely.
We can't just guess what autistic people need.
Right.
We have to actually listen to them, hear their experiences, their needs, their dreams.
They're the experts on their own lives.
Exactly.
It's like, imagine trying to explain what it's like to be left-handed when you've only ever used your right hand.
Right.
You just get the full picture.
You get it wrong.
It's the same with autism.
Yeah, and reading this blog has really made me think about the words that we use to talk about autism and how much that can really shape our perceptions.
Yeah.
Like when we frame autism as a deficit or a disorder, it's no wonder that people see it as something that needs to be fixed.
Right, you're framing it in a negative way.
Exactly. But language is so powerful.
It is.
And when we use these words like deficit or disorder,
Yeah.
we create this sense of otherness.
Right.
But when we embrace this idea of neurodiversity,
Mm-hmm.
we open up a whole new way of seeing things.
It changes everything.
It's about celebrating differences and seeing the value in every individual, even if they don't fit the norm.
So it's not to say that autism doesn't come with its own challenges,
Right.
both for the individual and their families.
Of course.
But are those challenges coming from the autism itself?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they coming from a world that doesn't understand or accept them?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, think about a world where sensory sensitivities are taken into account everywhere you go,
Okay.
where communication differences are just seen as normal variations,
Right.
and where autistic people are appreciated for their unique strengths and ways of thinking.
Yeah.
That's the kind of world that we should be aiming for.
And it starts with challenging those harmful misconceptions.
Absolutely. Like the blog talks about being more open-minded.
Imagine a world where instead of trying to make autistic people fit in,
Yeah.
we actually redesign the world to be more inclusive.
I love that.
Think about things like, adjustable lighting in public spaces,
Right.
quiet zones for sensory breaks,
Yeah.
and just a greater understanding of different communication styles.
Yeah.
That's what real progress looks like.
I think this blog post really drives home the point that we need to move beyond these simplistic explanations.
Yeah, sure.
And really embrace the complexity of autism.
There's so much more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah. And to do that, we have to be willing to listen, to learn, and to challenge our own assumptions.
Absolutely.
And to recognize that autism isn't one size fits all.
Right, there's no right way to be autistic.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, it's about creating a world where autistic individuals feel seen, heard, and valued for exactly who they are,
Yes.
not for who we think they should be.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about this blog and this whole idea of autism and trauma.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But I think it's time to come back to that original question.
Okay.
Is this trend, this idea that autism equals trauma, is that accurate?
Right.
Or is it more harmful than helpful?
Well, based on everything we've talked about,
Yeah.
this blog makes a really strong case that it's not only inaccurate, but that it's actually really damaging.
Yeah, it's trying to take this really complex thing, autism, and boil it down to this one simple explanation.
Uh-huh.
And in doing so, it kind of misses the mark.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly.
This doesn't work.
And it ignores all the amazing strengths and perspectives that come with being autistic.
It takes something that's completely natural,
Right.
a variation in how the human brain works,
Mm-hmm.
and it tries to make it into something that's broken.
Right. It pathologizes it.
Exactly.
And like we've been talking about, that leads to all sorts of problems.
Right. Treatments that aren't actually helpful
Mm-hmm.
increase stigma,
Yeah.
lack of understanding and acceptance.
I think one of the big takeaways from all of this is just how important it is to be thoughtful about the language we use.
Absolutely.
When we talk about autism, words are powerful.
They really are.
And the way we frame things can have a huge impact on how autistic people are perceived and treated.
And how they see themselves.
Yes, exactly. And we have to remember that autism is a spectrum.
Right.
So every individual is different, and what might be challenging for one person could actually be a strength for another.
Exactly. There's no one right way to be autistic.
Right. And instead of trying to make everyone fit into this narrow definition of what we think is normal, we should be celebrating that diversity.
This blog is like a call to action.
It is.
It's not just about understanding autism better.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating a world where autistic individuals feel truly accepted and supported.
And we all have a role to play in that.
Absolutely.
Whether it's, educating ourselves about neurodiversity, speaking up when we hear harmful stereotypes, or just making an effort to listen to and amplify autistic voices.
And as you continue to learn about this, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
Think about how framing autism as trauma could affect someone's sense of self,
Mm-hmm.
their ability to get the right support,
Yeah.
how they feel about their place in the world.
That's such a powerful question.
It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you think about how we treat anyone who's different, really.
It applies to so much more than just autism.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into this really important topic.
We hope you learned something new.
And that you'll continue to learn and think about these issues.
Keep asking questions, keep listening, and keep advocating for a world that values neurodiversity.
In all its forms.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.